And I think everyone probably is thinking right now, what is the deal with a counterfeit sink? And let me just tell you, if you've ever had a sink break because of some sort of materials failure or because of an accident in your home, it is not a mess that you want to deal with. It's actually a little bit dangerous. If what we have is sinks that are either faulty from a material standpoint or maybe don't fit the plumbing fixtures, that's an annoyance. You're going to get defrauded, have to go buy a new sink, and probably no one's going to take that sink back and give you your money. The Imitation Nation podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabir Safdar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global. In this week's Imitation Nation, Gilead Sciences continues to march forward on their mission for patient safety, uncovering and then suing a drug diversion scheme. We cover counterfeit vinyl records and counterfeit sinks. And finally, it's Christmas for people fascinated with counterfeit medicine crime. It's Operation Pangea. All this coming up. All right. Sven, welcome. Imitation Nation number 31.
Thank you, Shabir. Good to see you. Happy Friday. For us, a very rainy Friday here in Ohio. I hope weather on the West Coast is nicer than for us, but happy Friday.
Inclement weather here just means it got foggy, which is not a big deal.
I went to school with somebody from San Francisco, and when I roommated with her, and she was part of our house, all she did on the weekends was watch the Weather Channel in Indiana because she was so excited there was actual weather. Versus San Francisco, she's like, we have fog in the morning and sunshine in the afternoon. She's like, that's about it. So she was beyond fascinated with weather.
Congrats to you on minting a high school graduate, by the way.
Yes, thank you. On you for your kids are as well kind of graduating college and stuff, right?
One's not yet out of college and one's not yet out of high school. So this is not a busy year for me.
All right. Well, you're getting there. Yeah, for us, it's a big shift over to university, and the second one is going into senior year. So exciting times.
So the absolute big news, apart from Operation Pangea, which is like Counterfeit-Drug Christmas, is that Gilead Sciences has filed a lawsuit against a collection of pharmacies in the New York City area for buying medicine back from patients, damaged bottles, but certainly out of the safe supply chain, and then reselling them through pharmacy-to-pharmacy marketplaces to unsuspecting pharmacies on the other end. Now, the unsuspecting word here is doing a lot of work, because when you see a bottle that came from McKesson normally for $3,700 that someone offers to you for $2,000, that should be considered suspicious product. But what they found is, I'm not kidding, tens of millions of dollars of product in the last 36 months being moved through these platforms, all of it unsafe, all of it that had been in the hands of the public and out of the hands of the safe part of the supply chain, the licensed part of the supply chain, and sold. And many of these were pharmacies that don't really exist. Like, they were pharmacies that had licenses that lasted less than a year, and the actual physical pharmacy often was never open. Some of them just had like an aluminum roll top door pulled down over the pharmacy, and they rarely, if ever, opened that door. So they were basically sham pharmacies in a lot of cases.
That's absolutely crazy. So, and you, I know you sent me the complaint, and I read it, and I'm still awestruck. So, Shabir, explain to me how did they uncover this criminal scheme? Like, what did they do, and what really is the criminal scheme going on here?
So here's how this scam worked, and I use this as a specific example I looked up. Gilead made a bottle of medicine that they'd sold to McKesson in October of 2025, and then they'd sold it to a pharmacy in Philadelphia. They sold it for $3,771. That pharmacy in October dispensed it to a patient. That same bottle mysteriously showed up in a New York pharmacy in December, where it was sold on one of the pharmacy-to-pharmacy marketplaces for $1,999, an almost 50% discount. Really, really crazy. Basically, what Gilead did was they employed a secret pharmacy shopper, and they went online and looked for these suspicious listings where the prices were too good to be true and bought them, and then used the serial number to trace where the bottles had come from and talk to everybody in the supply chain. And it's out of that, they unraveled what is, I would say conservatively, a $50 million diversion scheme.
So these like pharmacy to pharmacy platforms, like what are they and like why do they exist?
So for decades, pharmacists have exchanged product, sold each other product when they got one delivery a week from their prime wholesaler and they needed a medicine for a patient who is there right now, but they did not have it, and it would not be another 3 days until the truck showed up from the warehouse to bring them. So pharmacies have sold to each other for a long time. Also, sometimes they would argue for shortage reasons, or sometimes because one pharmacy bought a bottle of something that couldn't be dispensed because the patient didn't pick it up, and then they would sell it to another pharmacy and try and make their money back. I don't really know if this is actually a thing that should exist. A lot of product is returnable. There is a return window. Products can be out of the return window, but they do exist. That's the thing. And there is an argument that if they didn't have these platforms, there would be crime happening in WhatsApp groups as pharmacies, sketchy pharmacies sold to each other. But clearly the sketchy behavior is on the platforms as well.
So the idea is kind of like simplified when when you go somewhere and you want to buy something. Let's take a larger store, Macy's, and they're like, oh, let me see if another Macy's has it, right? So this is a larger version of, oh, sorry, I don't have that drug. Let me see if a drug in that network, in my network, has that drug so I can get it because I can't get it quick enough from McKesson, which for me is kind of the weird thing. You should always be able, I think, to get it probably from the wholesaler as quick, but I understand theoretically where the need comes from. Okay. So the overstocking or understocking, is that a normal problem? Do pharmacies always just buy too many? Is it just a forecasting issue? So how does it?
I would say that no pharmacy accidentally overstocks a $3,700 a bottle medicine. Maybe you have one that you accidentally buy, and then the patient you find out has moved to another state and is never going to come, and now you're stuck with it. This is sort of like if you go into a pawn shop and you say, I bought a $3,000 giant flat screen TV and I lost my job, and so I'm overextended. Maybe you're like, I would like to sell it to you. With some of these businesses doing $5 million in 6 months of this kind of overstock problem, it's like if I came into the pawn shop every week with 10 new TVs, right?
Yeah.
It's not an overstock problem. It's a crime problem.
Yeah, no, as you just said it, one of the things, and I encourage everybody to read the complaint. We'll link to it in the show notes. There's this one Queens-based pharmacy that over the course of 4 years bought and sold $26 million worth of medicines. To your point, if you overstock or understock or claim to overstock and understock $26 million worth of inventory, you probably shouldn't be in business. That's all I'm saying. It just seems to be, for a family pharmacy in Queens, that seems to be a rather large amount. As I found that number just staggering. So from all these pharmacies, like the one, for example, that's $26 million in Queens, were those all real pharmacies that like are just pharmacies and then they started to do a side business of that? Like what were they?
It seems like the defendants in this case had a habit of opening pharmacies and getting a license, but not actually going to a lot of the trouble of opening the doors of the physical space.
Mm,
And then the license was gone, often in under a year. And then they
yeah.
would just open another one.
Of course. It's incredible. And again, I encourage folks to look at this absolutely fantastic affidavit. The pictures of the pharmacies are crazy. They're just yes, it's theoretically, it says pharmacy on the outside. And when the investigators took pictures shooting on the inside, used to be a pharmacy at one point in time. This on the shelf sits something that looks like sunscreen. I don't know. But the shelves are empty. This is just an empty, dirty, used to be a pharmacy where they might have bought a license or bought the building or rented the building. And it's just fantastic. So now when you kind of look at the crime that there clearly was happening, what's the solution there for you?
Well, so it's actually interesting. The Drug Supply Chain Security Act, which serialized all of the bottles that were sold here, was instrumental in disassembling and investigating this crime. What Gilead did was they saw these listings with their secret shopper, who's also a community pharmacist, They saw these listings on these platforms that were too good to be true, and then they bought them. And then they looked at what they received and they took the serial number. And since they made it to begin with, they went back to the start and said, where did we sell it to? And in one case, they sold it to McKesson, and McKesson sold it to a pharmacy. And they went to the pharmacy and said, what happened to that bottle? And the pharmacy it was in Philadelphia, said, we dispensed it to a patient in October of 2025. So they were then left with this question of how did this bottle mysteriously get into the hands of a New York City pharmacist who then sold it for almost half off in December of 2025? And the answer is somewhere in there, a patient sold that bottle to a fixer or to the pharmacy in New York, who then illegally put it back into the supply chain. So the solution to this, I think the solution to this is for people to be prosecuted because this is a crime. This is both a federal and state crime. The people involved here, if they're found guilty, should never be allowed to own a pharmacy license. And since in one case it's an entire family business, no one in their family should be allowed to have a pharmacy license in the state of New York or frankly anywhere else forever. So the only thing I'm sad about here is that once again, Gilead has had to put down its own hard-earned money to first conduct an investigation and then to proceed to actually bring a civil litigation, which is incredibly expensive and time-consuming, at their own expense to protect all of us from criminals. I believe that we have other people that are involved in that kind of activity, and they have the power of grand juries and subpoenas and guns. I would like to see them take the lead in these cases instead of having to have Gilead basically do all the work in a civil suit and hand them the box of evidence at the end of it. I mean, I'm happy that that's a pipeline, the civil to criminal pipeline, but it's not really how these things are supposed to work.
It's not. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, stronger enforcement at the federal level, something also at the state level. But for something like this that goes state to state, definitely federal level. And, kind of while I was reading over the affidavit again while we're chatting here, the other piece that's in here for me, and again, this is my crazy dream here, but these pharmacy platforms should be held accountable as well. They should have a responsibility to do a due diligence or a know your customer when a pharmacy comes online to check what they are. They should easily be able to do what an investigator does, look at the location and say, dude, you're not a pharmacy. Number two, when you run $26 million worth of pharmaceuticals through my platform over 4 years, all kinds of triggers of due diligence should flip up to say, how do you justify a $26 million volume, right? So, and again, the platforms probably hide behind some Section 230 and like, ooh, we don't know what happens on our platform, but they're the facilitators of this, right? It would be, without these platforms, these anonymous online platforms, it would be incredibly hard to illegally transact $26 million and find all these pharmacies that you can sell it to. I think the next step needs to also be the platforms, very similar to what we have in social media. It's crazy.
I mean, I think the New York State regulatory authorities deserve some culpability here because these people keep getting and then giving up pharmacy licenses or getting them taken away for all I know. I think that the platforms need to do a better job of restricting the volume of what can be sold. There's no reason for you in 5 months to sell $2 million worth of overstock product. That's just not believable. You're not just bad at ordering. You have a criminal problem. You have a moral and ethics problem if you have bought that much. And it should be obvious to the platforms. They can see what's being sold. They should be like, you just sold a bottle of this $4,000 a bottle medicine just last month. Tell us again how you made the same mistake a month later. There is one bright spot here, which is that one of the vendors that I've talked to in StockRx does make sure that everybody who receives the product gets actually the transaction purchasing information. That's not required legally, but they are requiring it of their sellers. And so that should allow you to immediately go in and get that medicine and basically call the next person upstream and say, did you really sell it to them or did you dispense it to a patient? I will say this, though. Pharmacists, and they're usually the safest part of the supply chain, the pharmacists buying product on these marketplaces,
Mm-hmm.
they have a responsibility.
100%.
And based upon what we've seen in this filing, there is no medicine that you buy that shows up either slightly damaged or too cheap to be true that you shouldn't have to quarantine. Every medicine you buy that meets that criteria, the FDA has said you have a legal obligation to quarantine and verify it before you give it to a patient. I don't think anyone's doing that right now.
Because the pharmacies buying on these platforms, are they buying mostly because it's cheaper, because there's a reason for like, oh, I overstocked or it's damaged or something? That's why they buy it, right?
They're buying it because it's cheaper. The idea of resolving shortages is not actually one that is believable. I've talked to shortage experts and they have told me they would never resolve drug shortages this way. They would have pharmacies return the product to their wholesaler and then have the wholesalers move it around the country. That allows the wholesaler to say, okay, I have a record that it was sold to them. I received it back. I confirmed it's the real thing and not tampered with. And now I can give it to another wholesaler to give it to a pharmacy to a patient. Shortage experts tell me they would never, ever, ever have one pharmacy buy from another pharmacy and then hand it to a patient. That's just an invitation to fraud.
So since we're not afraid sometimes to make bold claims or ask for things that are unusual, do we think these platforms should be banned?
I have desires for these platforms to operate under restrictions that would probably not make them a great viable business. I'll say that. I don't need to see them banned, but I don't really see how it is that you make a business on someone selling $3 million worth of product that you accidentally overbought and mostly the same, right? Like these are just the Gilead products that they recorded. So
Yeah.
one little pharmacy sold like $2.4 million worth of Gilead product in 5 months before their pharmacy license sunsetted. It's crazy to think that you look at that and go, huh, were they like some kind of special HIV and hepatitis C pharmacy that just suddenly went out of business? Or perhaps are they actually getting the product from some unsavory illegal source? I think it's the latter.
So these need aggressive reform as far as complying with DSSCA, making sure you know your customer when you onboard pharmacies. The pharmacy boards need to make sure these licenses don't just easily can transfer in and out. And then the buyers have obligations. So it needs to be reformed from all sides, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the easiest thing to start with is that the FDA probably needs to say, you know, to pharmacists, if you buy off these platforms, we just want to remind you that all of these conditions mean that it's suspect product and you have a legal obligation to segregate it, quarantine it, and verify it before you give it to a patient. That would probably go a long way to causing the platforms to sort of think harder. But the platforms need to not just allow themselves to be a clearinghouse for this kind of crap.
Great story. Thank you. I want to cover a story and hit on a story that we saw in the UK because it shows how counterfeiters they always follow the money, right? They always follow the biggest demand. They follow where trends are going, where the money is. So police in London, in the suburb of Luton, seized nearly 6,500 vinyl records in a raid that was led by the City of London Police Department, and they have an intellectual property unit. Very unique for a large city to have a unit that's focused on IP protection. So very cool. We've actually met with them before. It's a really, really unique unit. And so the seizure that they did of these 6,500 vinyl records is about, 259,000 pounds in value. What was the more interesting for me is that these counterfeit vinyl records are now making a comeback since the vinyl business is making a comeback, right? My kids, for example, now collect vinyl records of their favorite artists. So this is making a comeback. And as that market is making a comeback, immediately the counterfeits are starting to surge. As the collectibles and the collectible market increases in prices, the counterfeiters are like, oh, that's a terrific opportunity for us to say, oh no, this is the original Beatles album, etc. So for consumers, it's really important. These products are incredibly difficult to spot. The packaging can look really, really convincing. especially in online marketplaces, right? When I can make it look truly like a legitimate one. So folks are really, really encouraged to try to figure out how to authenticate it and really closely inspect it before buying, which online is very hard. And so authorities are also pointing out that, something that we talk a lot about on this show is that these operations, they are not isolated. So this is not Billy Bob in London selling these vinyl records, but these are broader criminal networks. It's all organized crime behind it. And they're just using this as one of the distribution channels. So I just found this really interesting, that really no market is safe from counterfeit. And the moment a market gets hot and interesting, counterfeiters will swoop.
I can only imagine, like, I remember when people had CD burners and DVD burners, and you get sort of poor dubs of videos.
I
But
remember that.
a vinyl record pressing machine? Like, oh my God, isn't that expensive to get? That's like the most, like, that's like a high cost counterfeit.
I think my biggest worry with these things is, and would be interesting to see, is just the outside might be counterfeit. Like it looks like, so it's basically just a cover. And the moment you put it on, inside you have Britney Spears, right? So you think you bought the
Hey, hey,
Beatles.
hey, hey, I'm a Britney Spears fan.
This was no Queen or this on Queen Britney, but I'm just saying it could be as simple as that the vinyl looks black, but the moment you put it on, you're like, oh, that's not the band I bought. So it might be completely counterfeit. It's not the music of vinyl at all, and just labels. So yeah, because really going through the counterfeiting of the pressing of it, yeah, that's some serious equipment to have. So good question. We should buy
Yeah,
some and see what happens.
I wonder if it's just all a lot of Rick Astley and everybody's getting rickrolled that buys one of these counterfeit vinyl records.
That would be the perfect example of being rickrolled.
You've not only been defrauded, but you're being trolled at the same time.
Fantastic.
All right, so this is a new one for me. Every week, it seems like we find new things being counterfeited. I'm not surprised about this, but it is interesting that it happened. CBP in Norfolk, Virginia, who I will actually be nearby next week because I'm going to Norfolk for business,
Very nice.
caught $9,000, almost 93 counterfeit sinks. And this really goes to why I just think that we should never stop appreciating the people that work in the ports, like CBP, like the FDA inspectors, because CBP agents who looked at this shipment looked at this special logo. It's a third-party certification mark called the UPC Shield, and it indicates that the plumbing product is compliant with US and Canadian plumbing code and standards. And so these sinks had the UPC Shield on it, and they had a model number, but the agents were suspicious and looked up the model number, and it didn't exist. And after some work and a little research, they figured out that these were counterfeits. And not just counterfeits, but counterfeits with a third-party certification mark on it, much like something that would have a USDA sticker or Underwriters Labs would be considered counterfeit, but also like really like you went to a lot of trouble to forge someone else's certification mark. So they grabbed them and they kept them they kept them from being delivered into the US. I don't know if they opened an investigation, but they actually intercepted it. And I think everyone probably is thinking right now, what is the deal with a counterfeit sink? And let me just tell you, if you've ever had a sink break because of some sort of materials failure or because of an accident in your home, it is not a mess that you want to deal with. It's actually a little bit dangerous. If what we have is sinks that are either faulty from a material standpoint or maybe don't fit the plumbing fixtures that you need to put into them, that's an annoyance. You're going to get defrauded, have to go buy a new sink, and probably no one's going to take that sink back and give you your money. So they just protected 93 consumers from being defrauded, or maybe plumbers or contractors from being defrauded from these counterfeit products. So kudos to CBP Norfolk.
And folks, when you look at the show, look at the links, and look at the Twitter images of these seizures, and there is no chance that you look at this and you're like, oh yeah, that's a counterfeit sink. It looks like a good sink. The other thing also, and this is not a criticism of the fine people of the UPC Shield, whoever they may be, that's not a hard mark to counterfeit. Like it's just a black stamp that says UPC. So, I think part of that is also when you have, and UL partially is similar where the mark itself is not hard to counterfeit. If your mark is intended to verify the authentication or verify that this was checked, that this is a good product to have, I think these folks like UL, this UPC folks, should figure out how to link it back with some form of authentication feature that can be a code that links back to a website, links back to a tracing, or is there some form of tagging in it where you can detect if that's the real or not the real mark to provide additional security? Because I find it incredible that customs, and I'm sure customs found it because paperwork said this is, books. And then they opened it up. They're like, nope, that sinks. And found this and figured out it was counterfeit and verified it. So amazing work by CBP, but I'd like a little stronger assist from these folks that do these marks for the folks of CBP, et cetera, so they can even make more of these seizures. Because this is not constrained to things, obviously. You have the same issue in basically every counterfeit electronic that ever entered the United States. All of these marks are fake.
Absolutely.
Jabir, I have exciting news. It is Counterfeit Christmas.
It's Counterfeit-Drug Christmas. It's Operation Pangea. I'm so excited.
So Pangea 18 reported its results. For folks that are new to this, Operation Pangea is an annual effort by Interpol, coordinated across countries, to seize counterfeit medicines. This one was 90 countries, which resulted in counterfeit seizures of $15 million of medicines and medical products, 69 arrests, disturbed 66 or dismantled 66 criminal groups. And most importantly, they also disrupted over 5,700 websites, social media pages, and online channels. And so when I look at this report, there are several interesting developments in here. So I compared it to the couple last year's reports from Operation Pangea. And you might remember last year, they had this massive Operation Pangea. It lasted over 5 months. They reported over 65 million in seizures. Because when I saw these results, I was like, 15 million, that seemed lower. So I kind of dug into it, like what happened, and made some phone calls. So what basically happened is Operation Pangea over the years had become less efficient. When you look at the numbers, they were slowly trailing down. Operation Pangea 15 and 16 before that, they were seizing 11 million, 7 million before that, 11 million. So they were slowly drifting down. Websites seized had gone from 4,000 to 1,300. So they were losing efficiency. So what they did last year with Operation Pangea 17, they said, we are going to completely restructure it and we want to map all these networks. So we really understand who all the players are that are dumping it in. And so over the 5 months, did they have a very strong enforcement effort because it was longer, but it allowed them to really map these folks. So now as a result, this year, they're seizing $15 million again versus the 7 million they had before. And when you also look at 15 million in just a week versus 65 million over 5 months, it's actually a really impressive result. So they clearly figured out we're getting much more targeted and much more efficient on where we go. Same to websites. Last year it was 13,000. Again, it was over 5 months. This year in just 1 week, 5,700 websites, which is significantly higher to 1,300 where they used to be. So a really good, so to speak, reset for Operation Pangea last year to kind of figure out, okay, how do we do this better? How do we map these networks better, understanding which ports they use, which manufacturers they use, like basically figure all this out so I can make it much more efficient. And then the biggest thing for me there is the amount of online websites that were taken down, by far the highest of pretty much any year with the exception of the pandemic. And so the online component keeps expanding. And that's really the trend for us that we keep watching is more digital storefronts, more social media, more organized online distribution. So congrats to Interpol for looking at something, saying, hey, that's not fully working, resetting it last year, and coming back really strong this year. So always an impressive counterfeit Christmas.
So there's two things about this year's Pangea that I love. And one is a continuation of last year, which is that the operation seems like it's getting longer,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have no complaint if Interpol wants to run a permanent operation to disrupt counterfeit medicine in a global fashion. If Operation Pangea, 18 starts the minute that 17 ended and runs all the way through, and they're actively working, then what we've got is a global coordinated law enforcement effort to protect patients around the world. And I am giddy happy at that. The second thing, another thing that I think is not going to show up in the numbers, but Interpol should probably be given credit for, is that online fake pharmacies, the illegal online pharmacy business, is never just a single pharmacy. A criminal group will have entire networks of dozens or hundreds of these, some of them dark,
Mm-hmm.
waiting for one to get taken down so they can put another one up. If they took the time, as it seems Interpol did this year, to map out these criminal networks first and then take most of them down, they actually did something that doesn't show up well in the numbers, but they actually made patients safer by not allowing the criminals to resiliently put up their dark sites the minute that the other ones got taken down.
Yeah, no, that's a very smart observation, Shabir. These clusters of websites, and I think you said it perfectly. Just when you see one fake website, that means this is the one that's live, and that the criminals already built 20 exactly identical looking ones ready to go up the moment you took those down. To avoid the whack-a-mole, taking them down as clusters. Oh yeah, fantastic. And I agree with you. Interpol, partially with the mapping, I think did this, and that's why the numbers are so much higher on the online side now. So yeah, absolutely agreed.
Excellent. Well, we have some interviews lined up, which if we can get scheduling done and you and I ever stop traveling both at alternate times, we can actually conduct those interviews. But I think that's it for Imitation Nation number 31.
Fantastic. Shabir, good seeing you. Safe travels because you're traveling. With that, Shabir, read us out.
The Imitation Nation podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner of this production. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers. Podcast management by Sarah Imber Safdar. Theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.